Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Nisabho's final talk of the week, anyway. So this evening we have Nisabho who will be sharing a short meditation as well as a Dhamma talk with us. And hello to Gita, Aya Vimalanyani, Kumu, Ron, Denise, and Jens. And hello as well to everyone else who's watching. So at this time, I'll pass things over to Nisabho for the second part of Buddhist protections.
Okay, so this will be the last talk, but we're going to start with a guided meditation. So, close your eyes and set your body erect. Drawing in the lower spine, moving your awareness up the vertebrae one at a time until it reaches the crown of the head. And then imagining the body suspended as if from a small string from the crown of the head, sitting with dignity. And just let the thoughts settle a bit and allow sounds to come into awareness as they will. Allow the breath to become more prominent. Relax the eyes and the jaw. Widen the chest. Soften the neck, straighten the spine. Take 3 very deep breaths and exhale very, very slowly. And now just follow the breath, either at one point where it's prominent, such as the nose or the chest, or imagining the body as a whole, the chamber expanding and contracting with the breath. Just relax into that for a while. And see if you can detect a very light ringing sound can almost seem like a hissing at first. In the background of your awareness, it's always there. It's always constant, but we frequently overlook it. Referred to as the sound of silence or the nada sound. And just breathe for a time, seeing if you can begin to hear it. And if you can't, don't worry. You have to actually be a bit receptive for it to come into awareness, so it doesn't work to try too hard. But as you relax into the breath, keep an eye out for it. And when you do begin to hear it, allow the mind to track it along with the breath. It's consistent and bright. And allow your thoughts to dissolve into it, into the sound of silence. And if you have a usual meditation technique you use, such as working with the breath, or bringing to mind loving kindness, you can do that technique. But keep one finger on the sound of silence at the same time. And if you can't quite hear it, don't worry. It takes a while to cultivate. But do whatever technique you're comfortable with, and just keep an ear tuned. And usually as the mind becomes calm, the subtle ringing, a consistent note will rise. And just as you would try to keep your awareness of the breath continuous at that one point, allow also the mind to remain continuously with that sound, which is constant, always there. And when thoughts come up, just let them dissolve into that field of bright sound, that bright ringing. Sound can be a helpful auxiliary to any meditation object because it's constant and makes one be a bit more receptive, and thoughts can fade into it. So you're free to keep it in the background for this next bit if you want, but you can also let it go. And bring to mind your own morality. If you've been keeping the 5 precepts or certain amounts of the 5 precepts, certain ones, such as the first of not killing, then recollect what a gift that is. That in a world where beings, animals, little critters, insects are just terrified, that they don't need to be afraid of you. And this is why the Buddha said that holding the precepts was mahadana, great gift. And animals can sense it. Deer would come up to Ajahn Chah. Animals can sense when they're safe and when you mean them no harm. So recollect what it means that you hold life to be precious in a world that does not, and that you've not killed, and that you will not kill. Recollect that this is how the enlightened beings live. And so in this, you are aligning yourself and your mind and your heart with the eye of the enlightened beings, with the Buddha. You're living like they do. And if you've been keeping the second precept of not taking what is not given, think of the gift that gives to others as well. That they know that you will not take from them. That they feel safe around you in that way. And if you've been keeping the third precept of not engaging in sexual misconduct, then just bring to mind what that means to a partner. To not have to worry that you're cheating. To really be able to trust you completely. In a society that's so rife with sexual misconduct. Such that betrayal can rip people apart. And recollect that you have given someone safety in that they know that you will not do that. And that they can really trust you. And if you've been keeping the fourth of not lying, This is a big one. And really understand what it means for someone to know that when you say something, it is true. That you will not flatter them in a way that's not accurate. That if they ask you a question, you will give a straight answer. And that you will tell the truth in every situation and never lie. And what that really means to someone when they know that your words carry weight, even if they're not always pleasant to hear. I mean, if you've been keeping the fifth of not taking intoxicants, then recollect what it means that you are holding your mindfulness as sacred as it is. That you're protecting that faculty and honoring it by not compromising it. That even though maybe you can handle one drink or two, that in a society that is drowning in liquor in many ways and accepts it, that you're providing one example that one can live without drinking and interact without it, and that example might help someone who maybe can't moderate their drinking. That you're providing some other example or alternative to what society offers. And the Buddha compared someone of pure sila to a clean cloth, and to breaking of sila as ripping, such that you can recall your own morality, sila, as untorn, unblotched, clean, pure. And as the Buddha says, one becomes sensitive to the pleasure of being blameless. So just understand that sense of integration that happens to the heart when you're keeping your path straight in line with the teachings. You're not fracturing yourself away from what you know is your highest calling. And this is a great gift to others and to yourself, and is unbelievably rare in the world. And the Buddha says that this sila will keep you safe. So you can open your eyes now and come slowly out of meditation.
Well, thank you, Nisabho, for sharing that guided meditation with us. And welcome as well to more friends joining in, including PM, who says greetings from Sydney, to Bante and other vulnerables, as well as hello to Adine from the Pacific Northwest, Anita, as well as Benz, who's watching as well, and Angela. So at this time, I'll pass things over to Nisabho for the Dhamma talk.
Thanks, Bhante Siddhasa. Sumino. Thanks, Bhante Siddhasa, as well. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So thank you for joining us tonight. This is my last evening here at the monastery, and it's been really great just to be part of this community for this time. I've been visiting for about 2.5 weeks, and yeah, you all have access here to a really special community via if you're here right now or if you're part of these live streams. The particular flavor at Empty Cloud includes a willingness to look at both the wisdom in the Theravada as well as the Mahayana and find that wisdom wherever it hides, and also the strong focus on not just holding to the tradition, but also really trying to find the deepest threads of that tradition and how those align beautifully with our own understandings now in the modern age of what is correct and just and kind. And so the most progressive kind of orthodox to the point where it's actually progressive, if that makes sense. Things come full circle quite beautifully, and you realize the Buddha was 2,500 years ahead of his time. And so Empty Cloud is really working to tread that line with care and compassion and integrity. And that speaks also to the focus on study of the suttas and how they've been providing these teachings constantly, and also encouraging their monastics to look into all these things. So it's a really good community, and you should be grateful that it's worth reflecting on that and being grateful that everyone has access to that. And I've certainly been very grateful for my time here. So thank you, Bhante Siddhasa, Ayasoma, the community, one last time. So the talk tonight is the second part of a 2-part series on the Buddhist protections. And last night we went into what are called the guardian meditations, or the protective meditations, which are recollection of the Buddha, development of loving kindness, contemplation of the body, and contemplation of death, which are recollections the Buddha recommended for practitioners and specifically monastics. And I spoke at length on those yesterday, and how the first two of recollection of the Buddha and metta, loving kindness, provide food for the heart, give us something to step towards. Whereas the second two, Marananusati, contemplation of death, and contemplation of the body, asubha, help unshackle us from what we're trying to step away from. And in that sense, they're protective. And tonight, I wanted to speak on one of what can seem one of the most basic pieces of the practice, but one which is not terribly popular in the West, which is morality, or sila, and specifically the 5 precepts, but the concept in general. And I love that word, sila. It's one of those words that keeps sinking in deeper for me. Somehow it's almost onomatopoeic. It sounds like a bell. And that's a lot of what I think of morality as, I suppose, is when you begin to keep pure sila, pure morality, then it's as if you are, when you're not, then there's a sense of being a cracked bell. The sound you make is dim and dulled and imperfect and off key. And there's always this sense of a line through one's heart between what one knows one is capable of and what one's doing, and the idea that what one is doing maybe is beneath one. Whereas when one feels like one is living in tune with one's higher purpose and ultimate aspiration of awakening and living in that deep sense of kindness, then there's a sense of integration, and then the bell can sound a pure note. I've always appreciated the recollection the Buddha recommended around one's morality, which is what we went through in the meditation. It was a meditation he recommended to people frequently. And the wording in the suttas is one recollects one's morality as unbroken, untorn, untarnished. And that word untorn, I think, has sunk in deeper and deeper, because when one breaks morality, when one knows better but goes ahead and breaks the promise or hurts or deceives another person, then there's a sense of tearing, as if white cloth is being ripped by a rusty nail. I think that's the best image I've felt for myself. I feel it whenever I transgress in that way. And the Buddha said that benefits of keeping good morality are that one approaches every assembly with confidence and one dies unconfused. And that sense of safety and confidence that comes with morality, and also that sense that idea that one would not die confused if one has been keeping morality, aren't necessarily intuitive concepts for us growing up. Why would there be a connection between keeping these in our daily lives and having confidence or feeling safe? Why would this affect our feeling at the time of death? I think, though, that the experience is very much like that. When we break morality, when we do what we know we should not, we diminish ourselves. There's a sense of disintegration in the most literal way. We feel disintegrated. Something becomes weak, and you can feel it in the body. The body will suddenly feel much less strong. And there's also a sense of sudden lack of safety for me. If I've transgressed something significant, then, and hopefully that doesn't happen a lot, but there is a sense for the next few days of feeling very vulnerable. And I think that's because when the Buddha tells us to keep these precepts, and that these are the basis of our humanity, and that one who breaks the 5 precepts digs up the very roots of their humanity, then what he's saying is we need to align our actions with something beyond and above the shifting conditions of the world. Because when we compromise any of these precepts, it's for the sake of the world. It's for the sense pleasure. It's for the relationship we know we shouldn't be cultivating, and that's going to hurt our real partner. It's for the sake of not feeling embarrassed that we lie. It's for the sake of getting something we want. Maybe it's for the sake of fitting in that we take a drink, or for getting just completely wasted. Maybe it's for the sake of convenience that we spray the garden with pesticide. And in these cases, we are compromising these precepts because we are trying to get something from the world. And in doing that, we're buying into what the heart knows is a losing game. The heart deep down understands that this vortex of shifting conditions that surrounds us is not dependable, and that our white-knuckled grip on it can only lead us to suffering, that it's constantly slipping between our fingers. And as soon as we break a precept, then it's not a small thing, because it's not just the lie or the taking of something, but it's rather the complete change of the heart's trajectory from a trajectory towards Dhamma in spite of the world, versus the heart's sudden investment in the world and in conditions. And it's acknowledging that through action, through compromising itself by doing one of these things. So it's not that these actions are small. They're ornaments of the mind, and they're indicators of the heart and the heart state. And so when one routinely keeps these, when one really never kills, when one really never steals, and one knows that one will never lie, then a wholesome sense of self-worth develops, where one can say that. And as it says in the suttas, one becomes sensitive to the pleasure of being blameless. But that takes some time to develop. And what it means is that time and again, one is resisting this impulse to align oneself with the shifting conditions of the world. And so one is not victim anymore to them in the same way, because one doesn't believe in an embodied way that they are the ultimate adjudicators of one's life and worth and experience. When one keeps good sila, good morality, then one approaches any assembly with confidence, because one feels one's own integrity, and one also knows that whatever that assembly says doesn't affect that gem of light that one has been cultivating, that sense of clean self-worth. And one dies unconfused, because one knows that one would never compromise one's heart, even at the time of death. And at one level, these are both just worldly conditions doing what they do. The body dies, assemblies are approached, we are given approval or not. But because we no longer buy into those conditions, and because we've trained the heart through embodied action to not, then we aren't susceptible to them. And so there's no fear. And this is the great secret that the West has forgotten, is that ritual and action, embodied action, change the heart. We believe and understand well enough that our heart gives rise to action. We act from our internal understandings and impulses. But what we've forgotten is that the beauty of ritual and of restraint, such as sila, such as these precepts, is that over time, they change the heart too. So if one will have this experience that if one is keeping, say, the first precept of not killing, I remember I began, really keeping this precept very consciously. And, initially when I was a layman and say would kill a spider or something, spiders are gross, they're just like, they're not beautiful creatures. But if you keep the precept for 3 years of not killing, and every time a spider comes in, you want to crush it, but you get the dustpan and you kind of sweep it in and you throw it out as far as you can. And then it, maybe it sort of hangs off the dustpan and swings back in, and you throw it out again. And then this happens again and again and again. Then after 3 years, I sort of began to see spiders as cute. Like your perception changes because they're just critters. They're just little creatures. And in Thailand, thinking a spider's cute is not the same as thinking it's cute in the US. Spiders in Thailand are the size of your hand. And I've had my flip-flops eaten by ants in Thailand. It's a whole different experience. But if you're keeping a precept, the heart becomes trained and it affects you. Ajahn Amaro tells the story of keeping an ant farm. Ajahn Amaro tells a story of he got a plant and it got completely covered in aphids. And he would spend hours picking off the aphids day after day until one day he just gave up having a plant and decided to have an aphid farm. And I think this is good because in one way, okay, you could have a flower and just bring in some pesticide. Or you could recognize what you're doing to your heart when you spend hours picking off aphids or deciding to have an aphid farm, and understand that that's in many ways far more valuable than having a plant. Time spent keeping these precepts is not wasted. And the sense of not being afraid is enormous because, we're aligning ourselves with what is transcendent. And that means that we truly do have a sense of safety that lasts through all situations. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who was a Russian writer, he wrote the Gulag Archipelago, which more or less brought down the Soviet Union in many ways. It told the story of living inside the Gulag work camps, which he was stuck in for years, 10 years. He wrote it in his head, and it was circulated throughout the Russian underground. I think if you received it, you had 24 hours to read it before you had to pass it on to someone else. And obviously, if anyone found it, then you would be in huge trouble. And I think 1 out of 3 people in the Soviet Union were informers. So it was a huge risk. But basically, it said what was really happening in the Soviet Union underneath the surface. So he was in these work camps, and they are just brutal conditions, the stories he tells. But he also tells of meeting people in these camps who somehow were unaffected. Frequently, there are people who had a really strong motive system of morality ahead of time. So a lot of Christians who really had a lot of faith and had this strong framework of morality that held them even into these brutal conditions. He talks about a soil engineer named Gregory Ivanovich, and because of his skill set, he was offered the position of foreman on one of the camps, which is a great position. You could kind of relax a little bit, not die. And the one condition was that he'd have to cook the books just a little bit. He'd have to just put in a few more hours on the books than the prisoners were actually putting in. And he wouldn't do it. He was completely unwilling to lie ever. And Similarly, the prisoners once came across a store of left behind or potatoes that they were supposed to be transferring. And they all took some because they were all starving, but he wouldn't steal for anything. And Solzhenitsyn reflects on this strangeness in the fact that this man was unaffected by his time in the camp somehow. He seemed to grow stronger day by day, and the brightness in his eyes never died. And not that everyone who maintained the morality in those camps flourished in that way, but Solzhenitsyn reflects that there were these few who kept their hearts alive, and the flame of their spirits never dimmed. And that's what it means when we align ourselves with what is beyond and above conditions. The transcendent in Buddhism, which we align ourselves with these precepts and with taking refuge in the Buddha, which is the transcendent. It doesn't have to be an ontological concept right off the bat. It can just be, for now, if this is as far as you're willing to go, the fact that there is a part of the human heart which can stand completely unaffected by conditions. There is something in the human heart which can let a Tibetan Lama be tortured in Chinese prison for 20 years and come out saying that his one fear during those years was that he would lose love for his captors, but that it hadn't happened. So, taking refuge in the Buddha and keeping these precepts are not separate. It's our embodied way of enacting and aligning our heart with the transcendent, with that part of the heart which is different and above all of those conditions. And it's also more than that, or it can't really be more than that, that's quite a lot, but it's something else as well. Because the 5 precepts, people usually get to about 4, and then that 5th one, what's the problem with a glass of wine every now and again? And fair enough, but it's certainly better to keep 4 than none. But there is something deeply powerful about surrender and complete surrender to the Buddha's teaching. We're so unwilling to sacrifice anything in our privileged and pampered existence in the West. And sacrifice is an interesting word because it has the same root as sacred. And if you don't sacrifice anything, you never have the ability to make anything sacred. It's only through sacrifice that we sanctify a life. So I remember holding, coming more and more into these precepts, and really when I stopped trying to negotiate with them, with the tradition, and just gave in and really trusted this tradition and this teaching of the Buddha, and just took the 5. And even though I didn't understand the full implications of it, just gave myself to the form. That act in itself, the whole-bodied surrender, was worth a huge amount. There's a significant difference between holding 4 precepts and negotiating around the 5th, and just holding them all, and just giving oneself up to the Buddha, and understanding that act of sacrifice in itself is a huge, it's a huge boon of its own, in its own right. And once again, for those who are negotiating around the 5th, I understand, but you can recollect that in the Buddhist conception, we've been wandering for eons. And the chance to have mindfulness as a human being and to cultivate that faculty is unbelievably rare. And to compromise that is deeply disrespectful to that faculty and to that ability as a human being. And also that I just remember how I'd see my parents say, I saw my, say, dad have a drink or two. And as a kid, I could sense a change. And I didn't like that change. If you think about it, a drink is not just a drink. Something changes in people. And I think that's worth recollecting. And also that it means something. I remember as a layperson being so hungry for some sign of the transcendent, some spiritual path, some spark. And it is worth someone who's not drinking or taking intoxicants or stepping away from the world just in small ways is embodying and pointing to something else. And the fact that they stand out, it might be awkward and cause friction in certain situations, but it's not a bad thing necessarily. You're pointing to something else. And you never know who's going to take that sign and move with it towards something truly valuable. As a sincere practitioner, we are embodying and representing the Buddha's teachings. And that's an enormous responsibility. These are the most precious teachings I've ever encountered, and they've saved my life in many ways. Not that I wouldn't have continued to live an all right life if I hadn't encountered them, but compared to what my life has been allowed to become, I think the only way I can put it is that they saved my life. And if you have a chance to represent those to someone, to embody those, to surrender yourself to those, to honor them. And the Buddha said this, that when one does not follow his instructions, one shows the Buddha discourtesy. So I think it's a beautiful chance to show our humility for once as Westerners. And there's a famous saying that when bowing disappears from the world, Buddhism will have disappeared. And these precepts are not just ways of aligning ourselves with something higher, of protecting ourselves, of protecting other beings, but also they're our way of bowing. And then there's the strange magic that happens with morality, in that one actually is safer. The world does rise to meet one in a way you would not expect when you're keeping good morality, because somehow you're aligning yourself with the Dhamma, and the world resonates with that. So I spoke yesterday about walking tudong, which is where monks will wander without money and without food. And we can't handle money. We can't request anything uninvited except for water. We can't store food. We have to eat before noon. So you just walk and you see what happens. And time and again, people come and support you and offer and want to help. And it's baffling because you wouldn't expect it, especially in the West. But we've had a monk who has wandered the East Coast for 3 years and lived just on alms in that way. And some days you don't get enough to eat, but most days you do. And I think that you really do get the sense that the world is holding you because you are practicing well, because you are keeping morality, because something in you is aligning at a deep level with your highest aspiration, and people sense that. So, if every morning one gets up and bows to the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, and then one takes again those 5 precepts and really recollects it. And then at the end of the day does the same and recollects what it meant that one surrendered one's life to this teaching and this path, that one gave the gift of fearlessness to all those around one, and begins to grow sensitive to the pleasure of being blameless and also the sense of security, then that is a great blessing for one's life and for those who are near one.
Annamayam Dhammakataya Sadhu Katam Karam Dadamase.
Sadhu, 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 anumodami.
Thank you, Nisabho, for sharing those words of Dhamma with us. And hello to some other friends joining in, including Miguel, Stacy, Mary, Nindi, Angela, Henley, Sunny, and LM. And there's already a couple of comments and questions. So Angela says, how can we atone or forgive ourselves for past transgressions of the precepts?
I've been there. You're not alone. You're not alone. Ajahn Chah said that 80% of the practice was knowing we should be able to let go of things and not being able to. So the Buddha said that there's a really beautiful verse in the Samyutta Nikaya, the Connected Discourses, where he says that one who constantly recollects their past deeds that they did wrong darkens their mind. And that instead one should reflect, that was not good, that was bad, but what's done can't be undone. And that then one should develop the 4 Brahma Viharas: metta, loving kindness, karuna, sympathetic joy, or compassion, mudita, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. And just as a conch blower would make themselves heard in all 4 directions, so whatever limited deed, whatever limited karma one did does not persist there. So developing loving kindness for oneself and having compassion, the Buddha was very clear that this will help dispel that mind state and that dwelling is not healthy on those things. This is really important for us self-flagellating Westerners and modern people in general. And also he compared the results of karma to salt mixed in water, and that if one has a small glass of water, which is like the constricted, narrowed mind without these vast states of, say, love and kindness, that you mix in a little bit of salt, a little bit of a bad deed, and it changes the taste of the whole drink. But if one has developed this broad mind and awareness and developed the loving kindness, then it's like mixing this bit of salt into the Ganges River, and it doesn't change the taste almost at all. So if one is cultivating the practice, then past karma isn't as powerful, isn't as potent. And that also means, hopefully, that one's feeling of self-deprecation fades little by little. But I think it's really helpful also to just understanding, self-compassion can be looked at understanding one's conditionality. And the Buddha said the admonition of the First Noble Truth is to look towards and comprehend our pain. And I think you can apply this in a sense to externals or action in a certain sense, in terms of tracing something back to the initial wound. And then it makes sense and one can have compassion for it. So whatever one did that was wrong, really tracing back that deed to why, what was the motivation or the pain that motivated it, because we act badly out of our own suffering. Either, the wife who cheats on a husband or the husband who cheats on a wife does it maybe because really they haven't received love for a long time, or because their life has become dull or something. And these aren't excuses, but understanding the pain that gave rise to one's action can help one understand the whole picture a little more. Similarly, if one has certain ways of acting that always get in the way, or which cause one to act badly, then one can really look at what in one's childhood, say, made one take on those ways of acting. Maybe you had to, you had to lie a little bit as a kid to make your parents get along, or to have your dad not explode. And if you recollect these patterns that are so unhealthy as an adult as being the remnants of survival mechanisms from your past, then you can acknowledge them and say, thank you for helping me, but I don't need you anymore. But that's a whole different way of approaching your neuroses than berating yourself for transgressing one more time. So I think that's a very good way of forgiving oneself, is understanding one's conditionality. What gave rise to these actions? What was the suffering that gave rise to them? And if one understands the suffering or the initial wound, then one can, the sense of wrongness can disappear, and one can still give up the action, but it doesn't just compound into more aversion. There's an understanding and forgiving there. And confessing to a friend, that's very important, a spiritual companion, that helps a lot. And then if one needs to, sometimes doing a ritual of some kind, or apologizing to those who need to be apologized to.
Okay. And Elaine says, Bante, if you have a chance, please check out Canadian psychologist Dr. Jordan Peterson, who has a lot to say about morality, etc.
Schultenitsen, yes, I believe he speaks to him.
And Sunita says, how can we stay connected to the Venerable Tan Nisabho once you leave Empty Cloud Monastery? Will you be doing online talks like this in the Pacific Northwest that we can follow?
Yeah. We have a website, and but ISOM and Bhante Siddhatso have really kindly allowed Ajahn Kovilo and I to live stream onto the YouTube channel here on Mondays and Sundays, and to do a monthly First Friday monk chat with everyone together. So yeah, hopefully we'll have a growing and warm and fun relationship between Empty Cloud and the West Coast Clear Mountain Monastery, which is not actually a monastery yet. It's the idea of a monastery. And so, yeah, that's how.
And Adine says, in Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, he details how finding meaning helped him survive concentration camps. The Dhamma is what gives meaning to many of our lives amidst materialism.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I think meaning is what really sustains us, and it's what we are so lacking in. It's why modern suburban existence can be so soul crushing, is because we've lost our systems of meaning that overlaid our experience and justified the stress and pain of life. And it's beautiful because the Dhamma is it's another canopy of meaning, and it's one that is palatable to people in this day and age, and it is extremely simple and extremely potent. But to utilize it correctly, it cannot be just another intellectual exercise, which is why meditating every day, at least 20 minutes twice a day if one can, 45 minutes twice a day is better. An hour and a half twice a day is really good. If one can do that, then one's life will gain meaning with those, with that progression in the practice, because then the mind is strong enough to use every experience and action in life as one tool towards clarifying and purifying the heart, which means that every action, no matter how small and mundane, becomes profoundly meaningful because it's one more step towards the most, the highest aspiration we can conceptualize, which is complete liberation from suffering and complete purification of the heart. And then there are no small actions. So this is the power of meditation and the centered mind, is that if one can bring one's intention to one's life and make all action an ornament of the mind, then all of life becomes imbued with meaning again.
And there's a question on Instagram from Wahi Style, but it's a bit off topic. So I would invite you to bring the question to Monk Chats tomorrow evening at 7:30 p.m. New York City time, where you can ask it to a panel of multiple monastics and get their response. And there's a question from Jens on YouTube. Can you talk about the connection between Saddha and Sila?
Yeah, I think it speaks to what I talked about briefly in terms of we understand well enough how the heart's impulse gives rise to action. So we understand very well that if one has faith, they might hold precepts. What we are less accustomed to understanding is the fact that embodied action affects the heart. So what's counterintuitive, or what we don't understand until we've begun to practice, is that one who keeps sila increases their sattva. It works the other way too. And it's, as I said, that after 3 years of not killing spiders, you begin to think they're kind of cute. Similarly, after a year or 2 years or 3 years of surrendering to this practice, of putting aside time to meditate, of keeping precepts, even if one doesn't initially understand what they are, because every time one restrains an action, every time one wants to lie but says, no, I've committed to this path, to the Buddha, to the teaching, I don't lie. Or every time one wants to, just slap the fly or the mosquito on one's arm, and one restrains that, then one is affecting one's using intention to change the mind. And because each of those actions is explicitly connected to one's surrender to this path and to the Buddha and to this ideal in the human heart, then that intention affects one over time and one's faith grows. It's difficult because there's a delay. You don't become sensitive to this sort of pleasure of being blameless and that sort of wholesome pride for a year or 2 years of really holding to this path. But when it does when faith grows in that way, then it's a huge blessing in one's life. So the Buddha said that in the Digha Nikaya that wisdom and morality wash each other like two hands, where one is the other is. And that's not quite the same as faith and morality, but in many ways it is as well. Morality supplements all these other qualities.
And that's the final question on YouTube, unless there's anything in person here at the monastery. Otherwise, lots of thank yous and folks who will be looking forward to your other talks coming up on Sundays and Mondays, and people who are looking forward to following all the happenings with Clear Mountain Monastery. So glad everyone can join us tonight. Tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. New York City time, we'll have Sutta study as usual. And then in the evening at 7:30 p.m., monk chats with a panel of monastics, which unfortunately won't include Nisabho. He'll be on a plane.
I will.
Heading west. But if you can join us then, please do. And you can ask any questions related to Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha at that time. But for now, we can end with 3 sadhus.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
And enjoy the rest of your night.